All right, so before we start I would like to begin by paying my respects to the past and present elders of the Kulin Nation and acknowledge the custodianship of the land on which we are meeting today. So I am on Kulin Nation land here in Elwood, but I know we've got people from all around Victoria joining us today. So I just want to pay my respects to those elders, past, present and emerging. So today's session is a general child safety training session on safeguarding children in sport. So these are our new child safe champions, by the way, Emily Whitehead and Tyson Bull. We've just announced Emily for our 2020 child safe champion today, so keep your eye out for those social media posts, and we'll be posting about Tyson as well soon in the week. So just before I start, I do want to do a bit of a disclaimer, is we are talking about child abuse today, and specifically child sexual assault. And it can be a really, really confronting topic. And I know that there are people out there who have been affected by child abuse or child sexual assault. So if you are feeling triggered by the content in today's session, please make sure you tap out and take a break if you need to. There's some numbers and services that you can call on the screen. You can also give me a call at the end of the session as well if you need to debrief. I'm going to try and keep it as light as possible, but it is really hard to do that when you are talking about abuse. So another important reminder is at the end of today's session is take 5 to 10 minutes to do some self-care, have a tea, have some chocolate if you need to. I fully give you permission to do that. So today's session is a general child safety training session. It's really, the purpose of today's session is to help you develop a really good understanding of the why. I feel like there can be a real disconnect between what we're doing in the club on a daily basis, like, you know, what are the codes of behaviour and hiring people and making sure we have working with children checks. Like, how does that actually relate back to preventing children from being abused? So what I hope to do with this session today is give you a really solid understanding and a really good reason of why this is so important. So when you leave today's session, you're motivated and passionate about doing the right thing, and you can carry that message to others in the community. Obviously, with everything that's going on, we're not currently in our clubs right now. Some of us might be doing some online stuff. So now's the perfect time to kind of upskill and learn a little bit more. So we're going to go over a couple of things today. We're going to go over the rights of the child. We're going to go over some facts and stats, the different types of child abuse. We're going to talk about what to do. And if we have time, we'll have some child safe behaviour, but we're probably going to stop at about 10 to 11 to do some questions and answers. So yeah, why are we here? Why am I in gymnastics and I keep hearing about child safety? I'm just a coach. I've never seen anything happen. What's the big deal? This is probably one of the most common reactions I get when I'm out in clubs or talking to people in our community is like, why does it matter? They understand that obviously child abuse is something that's really big and horrible and we need to prevent it, but like, how does it relate back to me? I'm just a gymnastics coach. So the reality is that child abuse happens a lot more than the average person realizes, and gymnastics is not some magical place where kids don't get abused. There have certainly been historically cases of kids coming to clubs in Victoria and getting sexually assaulted. It's happened all around Australia, and we know this because of the Royal Commission. So a couple of you guys are going to hear me say those words, the Royal Commission, and you may or may not know what that is. So I just want to briefly describe it to you. So basically, a couple of years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, there was an outcry in the community to the government saying, why are kids going to places where they should be kept safe, like schools, churches, sporting clubs? Why are they going to these places and getting sexually abused And also, it's happening a lot more than you realise. And after years of lobbying, the government finally acknowledged that, yes, something was going on, they needed to look into it. So they established a royal commission, and that was for the whole of Australia. And it looked specifically into children being sexually assaulted in institutions. And what they found was it wasn't just one or two bad guys out there or girls doing the wrong thing. It was the 99 good, well-intentioned people who ended up doing the wrong thing because they just didn't know any better, that facilitated perpetrators being able to go into these places and assault hundreds and thousands of children. The Royal Commission spoke to, I think, 7,000 or 8,000 survivors of child abuse, and they saw that lots of similar things were happening in organisations that worked with children and young people. So no one was doing keeping kids safe particularly well. We were all kind of doing really bad about it. And as a result of this big Royal Commission is they implemented some changes in laws. So Victoria was one of the first to have child safe standards. So that is basically a law that says if you're an organisation that works with kids, if you're a gymnastics club, there are certain things you have to put in place to keep kids safe from being assaulted. And that's where my role first started with Gymnastics Victoria, in supporting clubs and our organisation to make sure we meet all those requirements. So when I talk about the Royal Commission, that's what I'm talking about, and this is basically why I've ended up here today in this position. So something I want to touch on briefly today is why are we doing what we do? Are we just good people? Everyone that jumped on in this training, you know, we're the ones that particularly care about kids, and we're doing this because we think that, you know, we're good people. We don't want kids to get too abused. But what I think is really important is to acknowledge that we should actually be coming from a place of not just we're doing this because we're good, but because it is a fundamental right of every child or young person that passes through the door of your gymnastics club to be kept safe. So a question I like to throw out, and please feel free to unmute yourselves and jump in, because I'm going to put this question out to you guys now. If, God forbid, touch wood, something happened and you ended up in hospital tomorrow, or your loved one, is what would you expect when you were at hospital? Does anyone want to jump in and tell me what they think? Like, what would they expect? How would they expect to be treated while they were at hospital?
To be kept safe.
Yes, 100%. Thank you. You don't even really think about it, do you? You just expect that while you're at hospital, you'll be kept safe, right?
Yeah.
Yep. What else would we expect? Would we expect that the hospital has done criminal history checks on all the people working there so that while you're in hospital, you're not going to end up getting attacked?
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, would you even really think about that when you walk through the door, or would you just expect that while you're there, you're going to be kept safe?
It's probably an expectation.
100%.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. That is right. We kind of take it for granted, especially because we live in Australia and we are kept pretty safe at all times. My expectation, I wouldn't even think about it. I would just expect that the hospital had done the right checks and balances, they'd done the right things, and that while I was there, I was going to be treated equally. The person in the bed next to me wasn't going to get treated better just because they had more money or were from a better suburb, that I'm going to be spoken to with respect by all the staff members, and that 100% I'm not at any risk while I'm there. So it's exactly the same for our children that come into our gymnastics clubs. They have a fundamental right to be kept safe the minute they walk through the doors of your gymnastics club. And it's not because we're do-gooders, but the United Nations, everyone in the world has voted and agreed that it is a fundamental right of a child, just simply by being born, that you have a right to be kept safe. So for those of you that don't know, there is a United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and there's 42 articles. And basically it was the United Nations getting together and decided that children have specific rights that are separate to just your general rights that you have as a human being. This is one of the most ratified documents in the world. If you don't know what ratified means, that's okay, because I also had to Google it when I first heard it. Basically, it means that for a country to ratify this document, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, is they are agreeing to sign off on it and adopt it in principle. So they're basically saying, we agree to everything that's being said in this document, and we're also agreeing to, sanctions if we're not following this. So there is only one country in the world that hasn't ratified this document. Can anyone guess who that country might be? Just jump in and unmute yourselves. Any ideas? Who is the only country in the world that hasn't signed off?
USA.
That is 100% right. The US is the only country that hasn't signed off on the rights of the child. I was very surprised when I found that out. I thought it might be somewhere where perhaps there's more breaches of human rights, but it is the US. And one of the reasons why they haven't signed off on it is because once they sign off on it, they're basically agreeing that they could be sanctioned for not following it. And the US is notoriously bad when it comes to children's rights, because they tend to incarcerate lots of children at a very young age, and especially children from certain socioeconomic backgrounds. So just to recap is, we're all here today and doing this work, not because we should, but because it is the fundamental right of any kid, of any young person, for you yourselves as staff members, that when you walk through the door of a gymnastics club, that you are kept safe. Right, so now we're going to jump into some facts and stats. These can be a little bit depressing, so just a bit of a disclaimer there for you guys. But hopefully some of these will stick in your head and you'll kind of understand a little bit more about, again, why this work, why you being here today is so important. So 1 in 5 children and young people will be sexually harmed before their 18th birthday. And this statistic relates back to us in Australia. So you think about how many hundreds of kids you have walked through the door of your club. Even the smaller clubs still have a significant number of children coming through. The likelihood is that 1 in 5 of those are going to be sexually harmed before they turn 18. That is a huge number of kids being sexually harmed. And just to put it in perspective as well, is that is based on assaults that have been reported. And we know that sexual assault is notoriously underreported. We know that really, really little kids can't disclose as well. So that number is actually likely to be higher. So there is a very significant chance that during your work as a coach, you are going to come across kids that have been or are going to be sexually harmed. The average age of a child when they're first sexually abused is 6.9 years. So again, sometimes people think that that 1 in 5 statistic, that must just be a lot of teenagers that are getting sexually harmed, but that's actually not accurate. We know that children are often about 6.9 years old when they're first sexually assaulted, which is really, really young. That's a preppy or a grade 1. The Royal Commission looked at sport and recreation, and they found that in a sports setting that the people they spoke to were between the ages of 10 and 14 years old when they were first sexually assaulted in a sports setting. So for me, that drives home the fact that 90% of our membership base is made up of under 12, so we're a really high risk area. We've got lots of kids that fit into those age ranges. 1 in 3 Australian adults wouldn't actually believe a child if they disclosed that they were being sexually assaulted. This is why it's so, so important we're doing this training and we're debunking some of those myths, because we know that a lot of adults wouldn't actually believe a kid if they disclosed to them. And that's why when we do protective behaviours with kids is we tell them to go speak to 5 adults, because we know the chances are that just because they disclose to 1 adult doesn't mean that adult is actually going to believe them, which is really, really tough and difficult. In Australia, just Australia, every 2 minutes a report is made to Child Protection about a kid being abused. Every 2 minutes. So at the end of today's training session, 60 reports would have been made. Australia-wide, 30 reports would have been made, 30 reports would have been made to Child Protection about a kid in Australia being abused. Every 13 minutes, an investigation is conducted by Child Protection and it's found that a child was indeed being abused. Every 13 minutes. So I don't know about you guys, but when I first started in social work, I thought kids got abused in third world countries. I thought maybe Australia was actually doing pretty well, but the fact is a lot of children are being harmed out there. Every 13 minutes, the department goes out and investigates and finds that a child has been abused. 20, that is the number of years it takes for a child to disclose that they have been sexually assaulted. 20 years it takes for someone to come forward. This is why we can't rely on a kid will just speak up if they're being abused. They'll just tell me, because we know that doesn't happen. And there's a whole bunch of reasons. That 20 years is probably one of the most significant reasons that you're here doing this work today. It's not up to kids to tell us when something's going on. We can't rely on that. It is up to the adults. It is up to every single person in that club to be the voice, to know what to look for and to be able to speak up on behalf of a child. Because on average, we know it takes, that long for them to come forward. With child sexual assault, in 70 to 90% of cases, the person perpetrating that abuse is known to the child. It is a family member, it is a friend, it's their coach, it's their teacher. I think not so much now, but we used to think a lot about stranger danger. I was brought up where I was taught about a safe house and like if you saw a white van on the street, run. Whereas the statistics tell us it's far less likely to be some creepy person in a van outside your gymnastics club that's going to snatch a kid off the street and assault them. It's much more likely that it's a coach that everyone gets along and really likes within your club that's going to be the one perpetrating the abuse, or it's the family friend who offers to babysit, or the aunt or the uncle or the grandparent or even the parent. So that is why we do the work that we do, is because we know that it's not our role as people working in gymnastics isn't to prevent a kid getting snatched from a stranger off the street. We know it's more likely to be someone within our club. So we have to do more work to make sure it's really, really safe. And finally, we know that some children, unfortunately, are more vulnerable to abuse than others. So children that are from an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander background, children from what we call cold communities. Cold means culturally or linguistically diverse, so perhaps they speak another language or they're from another cultural background, and children with a disability are often more vulnerable. Does anyone have any questions about those facts or stats before we move on? Pretty eye-opening, maybe a little bit depressing as well. But hopefully, it really helps you see that this isn't just us overreacting or, I don't understand why child safety is so important. It's important because it happens a lot more than we realise. So I guess why sport in particular? So when I talk about, when I was speaking earlier about the Royal Commission, is they looked at different institutions. So they looked at education, they looked at religious institutions, and they specifically looked at sport and recreation. And they found that in sport, there were several unique risk factors that made kids more at risk of being sexually abused in a sports setting versus another setting. Some of those risk factors were within sport, we can often see violence and harassment is normalised. So the way I describe this is often if you're at a footy match and there's a parent on the sideline yelling at their kid, pick it up, you whatever, name calling, it seems more normal that that's occurring within the context of a football game. But if we saw that parent yelling at a child in the middle of a supermarket, that behaviour would probably stand out a lot more and would be more likely to do something about it and call it out. Where in a sports setting, behaviour like that can become normal really quickly. So I've often heard from gymnasts from way back, from historically, have talked about, specific coaches they have that, the coaching practice was to push really, really hard, bordering on maybe being emotionally abusive, but that was what was seen as normal within that club or that coach relationship at the time. So it didn't really stand out. So that's one of the reasons why maybe abuse goes unchecked in sports. Within sports, sexualized behavior and cultures become really, really normal. So you think about like the locker room for an AFL club, like that male backroom chat, or you think about like a dance setting, for example, where you've got lots of young girls who have makeup put on them. They're in leotards or things like that, and they're being made to be sexualized. And, especially in gymnastics as well, as we have to consider the fact that we do have a lot of young children, wearing leotards, and that's quite normal in our sport. Also, sport is really, really good at valuing adults over children and thinking about the level of involvement. So not so much for participation, but we've got some kids that spend more time in a gymnastics club than they do in their school or with mum and dad at home. So the final thing I wanted to talk about is, I guess, why gymnastics? So we are still, up until the start of this year, we were still one of the only sports to have a dedicated child safe manager working in this space. The AFL has now has another dedicated safeguarding manager. So, but we're still one of the only sports that has it. So what is it about gymnastics? Like, why are we making such a big deal about child safety? There are a couple of reasons. We are a really unique sport. We're a really amazing sport. We have so many positives, but we also, because of the way that our sport is set up, there are a lot of risks. And that's not to say that if a kid does gymnastics versus a kid doing, going down to the local netball club is more at risk of being sexually assaulted. There's nothing to say that, but certainly we can't be naive. We have to understand that there are things that occur within our gymnastics sport that don't occur outside in a netball or football club that make us more at risk. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So one is our kids are quite young. When we look at our membership base, the age of our members, the makeup versus another sport, is we are primarily a children's sport. I think we're the third most popular children's sport in Australia. Correct me if I'm wrong. And we know that the younger a child is, the more vulnerable they are to abuse, because younger children can't, there's a lot of reasons, but they can't speak up for themselves as much as an older child. So the fact that we have such a young population means that there is some significant risk for us there. Parental involvement is, in the past, we haven't been very good at involving parents in gymnastics. And again, this is not me speaking for all clubs. Some clubs do this really, really well, but there has been an attitude where perhaps it's easier not to have parents involved. And if you're, especially in that high performance setting in our sport, is you hand over everything to the coach. The coach kind of becomes the be all and end all. And we might have closed door training environments. What we actually know, what the Royal Commission showed, was that parents are a protective factor. It is actually safer for kids if parents are involved in their sport. And the thing I like to say to people is, who's more invested in the safety of their child, a parent or their coach? In most cases, it's mum or dad. They also see things that we don't. So parental involvement is a really, really important protective factor, and something that maybe culturally we haven't been very good at in gymnastics. It's one of the reasons that we created the new travel guidelines, Gymnastics Australia, is because we know that parents need to be involved to make kids safer. So that's one of the reasons one of those new rules was made about, if you're under 12 is you have to travel with a parent or guardian now. Something else that makes us really unique is, and this is more for our kids that are in the gym, for a significant period of time, is everyone I know in gymnastics that's been a gymnast, a high performance gymnast, is, gymnastics is their life. And they spend so many hours in the gym that it means that they're missing out on kind of those normal social experiences you'd get if you were just a typical kid or a teenager spending more time at school. And the lack of that experience means that perhaps you're not as good as being able to see what's normal and what's not. Coach reputation is tied directly to kids' performance, which means that coaches are under a lot of pressure, and this creates an environment where boundaries can get blurred and coaches might push harder than perhaps they should because their livelihood depends on how well those kids do. So that makes it really, really difficult as well when we're protecting children and young people. Physical contact. Obviously, this is the one that most people guess that makes our sport so risky. Yeah, absolutely. What other sport requires the amount of physical contact that gymnastics does? Maybe dance, perhaps swimming, not so much, but we're really, in terms of how much physical contact is required in our sport, it's really high in gymnastics, and it's because it's absolutely necessary. Is you cannot teach certain skills without some form of physical contact, but it also means that it's really normal in our sport for adults to be touching children. So if you saw a netball coach grabbing a kid by the waist and helping them throw the ball and shaping them, that would probably stand out as really odd. Whereas if you saw a gymnastics coach doing the same thing, is physically involved with a child, it's really, really normal within our sport. So it puts us at risk and makes it harder to kind of really spot that behaviour. Something else to consider is, again, our sport is generally not a team sport, although we do have team sports now, but generally gymnastics has been one-on-one, so coaches doing private sessions with kids hasn't been out of the ordinary. It's not unusual. Again, if you took your kid to the local footy club and their coach offered them a one-on-one private session to, help their footy skills, that would be a bit odd because it's a team sport, whereas if a gymnastics coach offered to do that, it wouldn't stand out as much. Something else is our scoring can be really, really subjective at times as well. Is, what I often hear when complaints come through is this fear of reporting behaviour because they're worried it's going to impact how that child is judged or, how they're treated at training and things like that. So we're not like the AFL where if you kick a ball between two posts, that equals 6 points. Our scoring is much more complicated than that and can sometimes be really subjective. And finally is we have this culture where we encourage our gymnasts to be really obedient, and they learn pretty quickly that this is an endurance sport. You're going to have to accommodate a certain level of discomfort and pain if you want to get really good results in gymnastics, which is, two traits that you need a gymnast to be. If you don't follow a coach's instructions, there's a real risk, because if you slip on a beam, that breaks your neck. Whereas a kid that's not that obedient and doesn't listen to their swimming coach as much isn't going to end up drowning because of it. So they're qualities that are really important in gymnasts, but the other side of the coin is it creates this perfect environment where we create children not to speak up and not to talk. So they're some of the reasons that we in gymnastics champion child safety and push it so hard, because the reality is there are risk factors within our sport that exist that don't exist in other settings. So we can't be naive about this and pretend that we're magically all going to be fine and good. And the final thing is it's actually the law now. So for those of you that work in a club or volunteer with Gymnastics Victoria, I mentioned the child safe standards before. So that is a Victorian law put in place that says if you are an organisation and you have kids, is you have to make sure that when you hire people, you make sure you're doing things like working with children checks and reference checks. You have to have a child safe policy. You have to have a process for reporting abuse. So it might feel really annoying if your club's asking you to do training or you've got to do X, Y, Z, but they're actually required to do that by law, and they can face significant fines or sanctions if they don't follow it. Gymnastics Victoria is also required to follow those laws. For you as individuals, there's also a failure to disclose offence. So that basically means that every person in Victoria who is over the age of 18 is mandated by law to report the sexual assault of a child. So regardless of your membership with Gymnastics Victoria, if you knew a child was being sexually abused and you didn't report it, you could be held criminally responsible for that. It's called the failure to disclose. Organisations are also subject to the failure to protect law. Basically, your managers, your club owners, boards and committees, if there is a risk to a child that they don't address, they don't recruit properly, they don't check someone's working with children check, and a child ends up being sexually assaulted, they can also be arrested and criminally charged by police for not preventing a preventable risk. So the different types of abuse. Sexual, good job for you guys of you that got that. Physical, neglect. Family violence is the one that I didn't see come up that we often forget about. And emotional. So sexual abuse is not just looking at the end of the spectrum where it's penetrative or rape. Sexual abuse is also any inappropriate sexual activity with a child. So it could be exposure to pornography, it could be inappropriate conversations and that inappropriate touch. Physical seems really obvious and easy, it's hurting a child physically, but something really important to note about physical abuse is it could also be training that exceeds a child's development. So if you overtrain a child to the point that they get injured, that could actually be classified as physical abuse. Neglect, again, seems really easy, is obviously failing to provide for a child's basic needs, not feeding them, clothing them. In Victoria, medical neglect is also reportable to child protection. So a parent that doesn't address a kid with significant medical needs by taking them to doctor's appointments and things like that. And in gymnastics, neglect is also failing to prevent a child from danger. So if you saw a hazard in the gym and you didn't address it and a child ended up getting hurt because of it, that could be constituted as child abuse under neglect. Emotional is probably one of the hardest ones to define just because it's not as simple as, a child got smacked or hit and there was a bruise. Emotional abuse, the threshold for that is that it has to have a direct impact on that child's emotional or physical development. So it could be a one-off or it could be a continued pattern of behaviour, but it all depends on how much it harms the child. So emotional is ill-treating a child, humiliating a child, taunting them, sarcasm, yelling, negative criticism, name-calling, ignoring, or placing unrealistic expectations on a child. Emotional is definitely one of the things I see come across my desk a lot when we're dealing with complaints. And family violence, a really important one that is often forgot about, but exposing a child to family violence can significantly impact a child's development. Even if the violence is just between two parents, the repercussions emotionally and the trauma it causes is massive. And again, this is where I've had a couple of phone calls from clubs who, a parent has disclosed family violence occurring in the home, but the kids weren't involved, so they didn't understand that they needed to report it. Absolutely, if you overhear anything about family and violence occurring in the home, that needs to be reported to child protection. And just so you know as well, it's a real problem in Victoria. Is one woman every week is murdered in Australia by her former or current partner. So we know family violence is a huge issue. So definitely when we're talking about types of abuse, something that we want to include. All right, on to more jury topics, guys. So you may have noticed today that this content has been specifically focused on child sexual assault versus those other types of abuse like physical, emotional neglect or family violence. And there is a reason. There's a reason that when we talk to you about the stuff that we do focus on sexual assault versus other types of abuse. And a couple of those reasons are when we look at child sexual assault, it's really different. It's different to physical and emotional abuse. And it's different for a couple of reasons. One, it's usually premeditated. So a parent that physically hurts a child, that pushes them or hits them, it's generally reactive and unplanned, and it's occurred because the parent is substance affected or there's a family violence incident and they're lashing out. Whereas someone that sexually abuses a child has usually done a bit of planning. They've tried to access that child, they've groomed that child. They don't just grab them and sexually assault them straight away. There's often some planning going into that. So as horrific as that is, the fact that it's premeditated means that we have more room to act, whereas it's really hard to be preventative in preventing a physical assault of a child when it's unplanned and reactive. Whereas if we know that we can get in there while it's still being premeditated and planned, we have more of an opportunity to do something about it. We know with the child sexual assault that it doesn't matter how much money you have, whether you went to a private school or a public school, that it occurs across every single socioeconomic area. Whereas other types of abuse may be aligned with socioeconomic factors. So, for example, is, in a poorer suburb, with high unemployment rates, is we might see more family violence and as a result more physical abuse and emotional abuse. Whereas with sexual assault, it happens in Toorak, it happens in Pakenham or Ferntree Gully or Dandenong or wherever. It happens anywhere and everywhere. With sexual assault, we know that the perpetrator is someone known to that child. Whereas when we look at physical, emotional neglect, in 90% of cases, it's the parent perpetrating that abuse. So our roles within a gymnastics setting as a coach or a judge are very, very different depending on the type of abuse. If it's physical, emotional neglect, our job is really just to report it. That's all we can do, is know the signs and make sure we're reporting it. Whereas with sexual abuse, there's a lot more we can be doing because it is more likely to be someone within the club perpetrating that abuse, not just happening at home where we have no control. So that's probably one of the most important reasons we focus on sexual assault, is because it's more likely to impact us whereas with physical or emotional abuse, it's more likely to be happening within the home. Child sexual assault, intrafamilial, extrafamilial, that just basically means it occurs within the family unit and also outside the family unit. So it's not just being perpetrated by a parent or a family member, it's being perpetrated by people known to the child, the teacher, the coach, whatnot. Whereas that other type of abuse, it's more often than not always occurring within the family unit. All right, again, can you guys jump back on Mentee Meter? All right, guys, is this true or false? I'm just going to ask this statement and get you guys to jump out and answer it. The stranger is the danger. Is that true or false? See how well everyone's been listening. All right. So, congratulations. Gold star, everyone. Absolutely correct. Shows that you were paying attention earlier. That's a bit of a myth. And that's something that's been perpetuated in the media. We hear about abduction cases where it's some creepy stranger taking a kid and assaulting them, whereas actually statistics tell us it's happening by someone that child knew. So great job, everyone. The stranger in danger, that is indeed false. All right, next question. Children from all backgrounds are vulnerable to sexual abuse. What do we think? Is this true? Is this false? Yes, absolutely. You guys, fantastic. Gold stars, 10 points to Gryffindor. Absolutely correct. We know that all children are vulnerable to sexual abuse. What I was just talking about before, those socioeconomic statistics don't matter. All right, children who are being sexually assaulted, they may not tell immediately. What do we think about this? Is this true? Is this false? Yeah, great job, guys. Remember that figure I threw out before? How long does it take for a child to disclose that they've been sexually assaulted? Can anyone remember? Feel free to jump in.
20 years.
Yes, 20 years. Great job. That is, again, another gold star. You guys are smashing it. So yeah, we know on average kids don't speak up. They don't speak up. That's why it's up to us as the adults to know what to look for. All right, next question. All sex offenders are male. All right, and again, this is 100%, guys. Great job. That is absolutely correct. There is not one physical characteristic that that applies to perpetrators of sexual abuse. They don't all look a certain way. They don't all have the same gender. Although yes, we do see the majority of perpetrators in reports are male. We know that, again, sexual assault is underreported. We know that males are less likely to come forward, and there are certainly females out there that perpetrate sexual assault. Really dangerous for us to think that it's only men. It could be that female coach as much as it could be that male coach. And again, they look like everyone. The registered sex offenders that I've met through my work, they're not just the creepy looking older guy. They look like everyone else. They look like normal people. It'd make police's job a whole lot easier if we knew it was just the people that looked a certain way. But yeah, absolutely, that is correct. Not all sex offenders are male. That is another myth. All right, good job, guys. We are at 11:49, so we're going to wrap up our training in the next couple of minutes and open up for a Q&A. So before we do, I just have a couple more slides for you. So I just briefly wanted to touch on, I've scared you with all these statistics now, made you think about what's going on in your own clubs. So the next area I kind of want to touch on really briefly is, well, what now? What do I do with all this information? How can I prevent kids from being harmed? So the most important thing we need to know about is the indicators of abuse. I'm not going to delve into those today because you've already done those on your online course and you can access them outside of this course. This is kind of something that you as a coach or a judge or a person in our gymnastics community, your job is to know what those indicators of abuse look like. Because again, remembering kids aren't going to speak up and they're not necessarily going to come and disclose to you verbally. So indicators of abuse can be physical, bruising, cuts, but indicators of abuse in kids are often behavioural and emotional. I don't know if you guys know this, working with kids, is especially with little ones, if they're tired or hungry, they don't come up to you necessarily and say, I'm tired or hungry. If they have a meltdown or a tantrum and you figure out from their behavior, you're upset right now because you haven't eaten, you need to eat. It's the same with abuse. Kids often disclose through their behavior, not verbally. So make sure that you as a coach, as a judge working in our community, have a really good understanding of what behavior you need to be keeping an eye out for kids in your club. If I could sum it up really easily for you, is you're looking for behavior that's out of the norm. So you're looking for, the kid that's normally really happy and really chirpy starts coming into gymnastics, they're withdrawn, they don't want to go to a certain coach, or maybe they're scared to go home. We're looking for behavior outside of their normal behavior. So they're the indicators of abuse. I just as well, finally, want to touch on where to go and what we can do. So hopefully you walk away today feeling a little bit more confident in, I guess, why we're doing what we need to do, and your eyes are a little bit more open, which is fantastic. But where do you go if you have concerns? If there is someone in your club that you're concerned about, it might even be a kid you're concerned about things occurring at home. It might be about the way that a club is, there's certain things the club's not doing that you're worried about. There's a certain coach or volunteer or staff member that you're not sure about. Is where do you go with those concerns? So first and foremost is, this is what I am here for. I am available to every single member in our community, and you don't have to go through your club if you don't feel confident. You can always pick up the phone, you can call me, you can email me. And for those of you that don't know, is we actually have an online reporting tool on our website on the Child Safe tab. You can submit a report there anytime. I get that and our CEO gets that. And you can choose to remain anonymous as well. So it's a really great avenue for you guys. You obviously as well, you have the right to go straight to police or child protection if you're concerned. You don't have to come to me. You don't have to go to club management straight away. Is you can go to police. And the other option as well is every club should have a child safety representative. So make sure you're reporting concerns to them. And just a quick reminder, under the child safe policy is every single person in gymnastics is mandated to report breaches of the child safe policy. So if you see coaches or people that aren't following the codes of behaviour, as a technical member, you're actually required to make sure you're reporting that information. Everything comes through to me and I capture it and I have a database, so I keep an eye on certain things, and it's really helpful. I need you guys to be my eyes and ears. Is I can't be out there in the clubs every day seeing what's going on. This is where you guys can 100% make a difference. People have made reports to me that have ended up in at least one case, someone eventually going to court, and this year they will be convicted and sentenced. And because of that one person's report, is I can 100% say we've prevented kids in our clubs from being sexually abused. So you can make a difference, and I'm really relying on you guys to make sure that you are reporting things through. Even if it's just a gut feeling, something doesn't feel right, is come have a chat to me or at least talk to someone else about it. So your job isn't to be an expert. Your job isn't to be able to say, I'm going to walk away from this training session, I'm now an expert in different types of abuse and I can diagnose it. Your job is to simply speak up if something doesn't feel right. That's all that I need from you guys today. Right, really good question just got popped up on the screen. Can you report past things that don't feel right, for example, in the last 6 to 12 months? The answer is 100% yes. I have received reports from as far back as the 70s, guys. So anything that doesn't feel right, that maybe even after today you're kind of going, please report through to me. I'd really encourage it. And, again, like I said, your job isn't to get people in trouble or to say that something bad has necessarily happened. But sometimes you might be holding a really key piece of information that in isolation doesn't look like a big deal, but you report it to me, and unbeknownst to you is I've got 2 other reports about that person in regards to similar things. Or same as, often when stuff is reported to child protection is you only have a really small piece of the picture and you go, look, this kid just something out of the ordinary happened. It doesn't seem that big deal. But when you call child protection, unbeknownst to you, there was a family violence call out the night before. They've got 3 other reports on that family. So I'd really encourage you past, stuff that's from the past is please do feel free to let me know about it. Even if I can just pop it down and create a record so that if something does occur again in the future, is we know, all right, there's a bit of a pattern of behaviour occurring then. So great question. Thank you for asking that. Hopefully I answered that. Does anyone have any other questions before we wrap it up for me? No? All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. Believe it or not, you sitting here doing this training is making a huge difference in our community. It will keep kids safe. It might not feel like it. So excellent work. I'm giving you all permission to take some time, the next 5 or 10 minutes, to do some self-care, because we've talked about some difficult topics today, and we will make sure you get your updating points. Great job, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day. I can see the sun's come out. Nice to have you all on joining us.